Hi, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Unlocking Venture Capital. I'm here today with John Roberts from Boot 64. Hi, John. How's it going?
Good, Sydney. Good to be with you.
Yes. So, John, tell us a little bit about your fund and would love to get into your incredible and very dynamic background.
Sure. So, Boot 64 operates a $10 million fund based out of New Orleans. It's a micro fund in the world of VC, but in Louisiana and New Orleans, pretty big deal. So, we are a pre-seed and seed stage focused fund, writing checks from 100,000 to 500,000. We have 14 portfolio companies thus far, on the way to somewhere around 50.
Awesome. Love it. And you came from a very entrepreneurial background to get to where you are today. Would love to dive a little bit about, your journey and how you got to where you are today and why you chose venture capital as, the path going forward for you.
Yeah, well, it was kind of an accident. Maybe it chose me, but in any case, most of my career was around building a chain of convenience stores and gas stations. And I've done a number of things along the way as well. Have did some house flipping during the financial crisis, and then had an ATM business, part of the convenience store stuff. So very several entrepreneurial things. In 2018, one of my fuel suppliers approached me about buying me out, which I was not intending to do at the time. And then I said no, and they sweetened the deal, and I had to take it. And so I sold, and without any idea of what I would do next, went on a cruise with my wife, and then coincidentally, a friend of mine that I'd known for a couple of decades called me and said, "What are you up to?" And I said, "Well, Charlie, I sold my locations, all of them, and I don't know what I'm going to do." And he had a startup called Moxie that's still around, a fintech startup, and he said, "Why don't you come and help us?" And so I ended up in a co-working space that called Launchpad here in New Orleans. Had 100 startups in there, and so I knew about startups, but I really wasn't into it that much. And so, but that was really my introduction into the startup scene in late 2018, and I could keep going. It's all the way to the fun. So I started, I liked some of the founders, and so I started doing some wrote a couple of angel checks and
Mhm.
stuff, and then I thought to myself, I said, like, I haven't checked on anything other than I like these guys and their idea, and
Yeah,
so
your way of vetting.
that's right, yeah. And so I said, I got to become more formal about this, and I had a friend that was in the at the time it was called the New Orleans Angel Fund, and the New Orleans Angels, and so I joined that organization and really started learning then about early stage investing and due diligence processes, and that was what I was doing. So I have a couple dozen and a half, 30, into personal angel investments over the years. And then in 2022, Louisiana Economic Development had put out an RFP
Yeah.
regarding the SSBCI program. And so I went to my business partner, and I had started another startup actually along the way there too. And so and went to my business partner, and we decided that we would respond to the RFP. And so we were then the first fund in Louisiana to receive funding through LED.
Yeah, and I noticed that, your thesis is so interesting for your fund in terms of special attention is given to veterans, socially and economically disadvantaged. So why were those things particularly important to you, and how did you guys come up with that kind of focus for your thesis?
Well, it's so Louisiana has a number of those types of founders, right? So we're a pretty rural state generally, besides a couple of big cities, and then we have a lot of veterans here because we have military base in North Louisiana too, actually, and then a small one in New Orleans area. So there are a lot of veterans here, and we have a lot of minorities and other underserved populations, and
Hmm.
so it made sense. And it was also part of the SSBCI program that if you incorporated that into your thesis, that it would be advantageous in receiving the funding, which is the seed capital program for those who want to know. So
Yeah.
basically, the seed capital program which Louisiana chose to participate in through the U.S. Treasury, will match up to $5 million as a limited partner investment to $5 million in private LP money.
Yeah, I really love that. And I think that not enough people know about these programs. We're going to for sure link this with our description when this comes out as well.
Great.
So I love that you came from, a very traditional kind of different industry into something that is very, very different in what you're investing in. And so that it must have been such a big shift. What kind of key lessons did you learn from when you were a business owner that you are today helping other entrepreneurs with? Because I know that you are quite hands-on in terms of what you do.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I'm an operator, I guess, is the type of personality in the business
Yeah.
world you would call me. But one of the key things that matters across all industries and even all the way into venture and startup world is people management. And
Hmm.
so, that was the key to my success in my entrepreneurial background was I was able to develop people and manage people well, promote from within the organization, ensure training was done properly, all the keys to success for employees to succeed and to grow in their jobs and be promoted. And
Yeah.
so really that is also the same in almost any other business that you're in. And one of the interesting things about startup world is, of course, most people are going to be the owner or the founder for the first time,
Yeah.
and they're typically younger, 20s and 30s, and so maybe have not really managed people at all in their careers. And so that's some value that I'm able to bring as a VC investing in a startup that with founders who don't have any experience managing other people.
Yeah, I find myself an operator too, and I find that to be a really important skill set when it comes to being a great investor. You're able to get into the weeds and into the details a little bit more, I think, than if you were just a financial investor.
Yeah,
So I really love that part of your background and how you were able to transcend it into like a completely different world as well, when you put on your investor hat.
right. Yeah, for sure.
One thing that I also have been asked a lot, so I also exited my company, is in terms of timing of the market. So, how did you know it was the right timing for you to exit versus stay on the path? What were the criteria that I'm sure a lot of your founders in your portfolio companies also come up to you to ask, oh, okay, so and so is interested in buying me out. So and so has this offer. First, is it real? And then secondly, how do I know that this is the right decision? So, what do you say to those founders?
Yeah, that's an interesting question, Sydney, and I hadn't really considered it very much myself. But I would say you're right. And at the first offer to buy my locations, it wasn't the right time because it wasn't enough money, I guess. And
Mm.
so, but when they came back, a month or 2 months later and sweetened the pot, then it became the right time because really I couldn't justify not selling basically. And
Yeah,
so
isn't that interesting, right? And like timing is different in every industry. So really only you would know.
that's right. Yeah. So it's not right. I was the sole owner of the business and such. So it's not no considerations to cap tables and investors or co-founders or any of that type of stuff.
Hmm.
In my case, but yeah, but it is the same premise, right? The when's the right time to sell, and is it the right time to sell?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And how do you know if it's a correct deal? So a lot of the times when people are like this is offered to me too when I was a young founder, it was offered by a competitor and you were not sure if that was for competitive analysis or if it was a real deal on the table. So,
Hmm.
how is it that you are able to vet to see if something is real?
Yeah. Yeah, so I mean that is very important, and I guess really you need to have some documentation behind the process, right? So letters of intent, and legal qualifications around the information that you're sharing with the potential buyer and such.
These are great, and I think that these are excellent check boxes that every founder should have. I know that you have also been on both sides of the table when it comes to be an LP investor, as well as, of course, fundraising for your own fund. And I was wondering, in terms of building trust with the LPs, how do you maintain transparency when you are negotiating on one or both sides of the table? And how do you maintain these long-term relationships?
Yeah, well, communication is key. In so far as raising from LPs, we had a fairly high success rate of once we got an in-person meeting with the LP, and they met us in person, and we had the ability to convey our thoughts and who we were personally, that we were able to close most of the LPs with just one in-person meeting. We had follow-up calls or emails and such, but just one in-person meeting. Most of the time we knew when we left the hour or so meeting if we were going to get that LP or not.
That's
Um, but and then as far as on the other side of the aisle, and me being an LP in I guess four different funds,
yeah.
you know, I I know the people. I mean, I may have met them, only a few years ago, or whatever. But I'm not an LP in any fund where I don't really know the firm or
Mhm.
the founder of the firm. So, I guess it makes it easier to invest. I guess when you have some type of personal relationship prior to when you're going to invest in the fund.
Yeah.
Not always possible, but that's what's happened for me.
And do you have any kind of criteria or risk analysis when you're choosing which funds that you want to be an LP at? Because as you, of course, are further and further in your career, your network's only going to get bigger. You're going to know way too many people. And
Yeah.
so, how do you kind of narrow that decision down for yourself and know which one is the right one to take?
Yeah, that's a good question. I guess that the no the thesis obviously is the key, and then knowing the GP of the fund are the two main things. I mean, I'm a LP in a fund that only invests in Y Combinator graduates.
Hmm.
So at before the demo day, oftentimes. So I like that as a thesis, and got me exposure to something that I wouldn't normally have been able to do, at
Hmm.
least not at the valuations when they come out of Y Combinator.
Yeah.
And then, the fund of an LP in a fund of funds. So, but I know the types of funds that they select, which are only VC Lab graduate funds. So again, the clearness of what's going to happen is, key for me. Not going to be it's a clear thesis with a target set of startups that they're looking for.
Yes. And I would love for you to share your story about the VC lab because when you first told me, I was just floored that it became such a small world. And the things that you got out of this conversation was amazing. So I would love for you to tell the story about how you got into VC lab and how you learned about it.
Yeah, yeah. So VC Lab is fantastic. So it branched out of the Founder Institute in the Deo Resi, I think in 2019, with the idea that they had launched all of these startups through the Founder Institute in chapters around the world. But in many of these locations, there was little to no venture capital. And
Yeah.
so they got the idea, why don't we start the similar type of programming, not a learning program, a real launching program,
Hmm.
with cohorts to launch funds that will be all over the world. And so, right when we got the approval letter, literally like within a week of when we got the approval letter from LED that we were going to get this SSBCI investment, if we were able to raise the private match, I was getting pitched cold by a guy named Andrew that I will never forget, but on LinkedIn,
He will
kind of
see
a
this
general
podcast.
yeah, it's probably general solicitation, but he was Ukrainian, so I took the call because I all that was going on and stuff, and so and every time I said, Andrew, what's going on with, you've never been a fund manager. How can I be an LP in this fund? Blah 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 blah. Every answer he was VC Lab. I went through the VC Lab program. I have VC Lab helping me, and so I didn't invest in his fund, but I looked up VC Lab because I had not heard of it, and I
Right.
was like, wow, this is fantastic. A 16-week program to launch your fund, and so. really and truly, I'm a big proponent of VC Lab. There's no chance that I would have been able to, or Michael and I would have been able to launch our fund as cleanly and efficiently as we had if we had not gone through VC Lab. They're up to cohort. We were cohort 9. They're up to
Yeah.
cohort 17 now.
Oh.
But it is truly a launching program. Like if you graduate, you will launch. You can't graduate without launching, which means that you have LOIs that they call packs, but with LPs lined up along the way. In the 16 weeks, you go through the whole process. You're not learning about VC. You're actually launching your fund.
Hmm. And then in terms of, one of the hardest things about being a emerging fund manager is, of course, raising your very first fund. And a lot of people don't have experience doing that. So what were some of the strategies that either you learned from the program or maybe from your colleagues that you did the program with, that you found to be particularly effective in the real world?
Yeah, well, we got our first LOI from an LP, just as a, semi friend, acquaintance, and stuff that I was having lunch with one day, and just started expressing enthusiastically about what we were launching and what was going to go on. And he asked me, like, "Hey, well, maybe I can invest in this fund." I said, "You know what?" I knew that he was an accredited investor, and so he's a fellow angel. And so
Yeah.
I said, "Yeah, that's great. I'm going to send you this LOI document," and he did close into the fund. So that was just luck. But one of the things that I noticed is if you can get, we were able to find a commercial banker, mid market banker,
Hmm.
who had recently retired and had, she was, client list that she knew everybody who had sold their business or et cetera, right? And so we added her as a venture partner, and that was her venture partner responsibility was fundraising, and
Ah,
she made introductions for us to people that probably could she could just make a phone call and get a meeting, no problem. And so we had that going for us. So I would recommend doing that. If
yeah.
anybody trying to raise a fund, look for a sizable banker who maybe just retired and is looking for something else to do. Um, and so, yeah, that really was a big. Oh, and the other thing was, angel investors, people who are in angel networks that don't really go to the meetings much, but they keep maintain their membership because they like the idea. They just don't have
Yeah.
the time to spend on it. They're also good targets to be LPs because they know the space and they want to be invested in early stage startups, but they don't have the time to go to the meetings and do their own due diligence. That was another way we was able to get some LPs.
Those are excellent tactics. And I really love your first one, which is never stop talking about your fund and your startup. You never know
Yeah,
what's going to come out of that lunch or that
that's
meeting,
right.
right? And
100%.
it's true. I think that people don't do that quite enough. So I love that. And I love being able that you put such a positive feeling for that other person about how excited you were about what you
Yes.
were building. And that kind of energy is super contagious.
Yes.
I
Definitely
love
work.
it. Um, I love that you have so much breadth of experience in the world of not just being a founder yourself, but also in different kinds of investment. So, you have been involved with SPVs, you have been an angel, you've run a fund as on a VC style, right? And so for each of these roles, which did you find the most challenging and why?
Yeah, I mean, I think doing angel investing is probably the most challenging, simply
Hmm.
because it's just your money and you are the sole decision maker. You don't have any other considerations other than whether this is a good investment for you and your portfolio. And so that, at least maybe it's not the most difficult, but I spent the most time,
Right,
agonizing over some of the investments. Um,
right,
so it's everything else, whether it's an SPV or the fund itself, was just a team of people and open discussion about the investment itself and different viewpoints and coming together on a deal memo that, if I'm doing my own personal angel investing, I'm not writing a deal memo myself.
right,
Participating in due diligence possibly, right? But
right.
yeah, so writing a deal memo and that whole process in collaboration makes these types of investments easier, I think.
Yeah, I think that that's a really great point that you brought up. Is just that the amount of risk that you are taking, a lot has to do with who you're working with. Because as an angel, if you wrote a deal memo, you're the one writing it and reading it. And so, like,
Yes.
what is the point of doing
Yeah.
that?
Yeah. Exactly. And the other thing
So,
is of course, when you're making 10, 20, $30,000 investments as an angel, you're kind of not important, right? In the big scheme of things, it's not like you're going to get a board seat, or, I mean, maybe the group together gets a board seat, but you're not going to get like information rights and all the time.
right.
You can't just call up the founder anytime you want. And when you a VC and you're writing, 6-figure checks, changes the dynamic around that, and so also improves your access and responses and such, when you're in the process of making the decision.
I love that. And I think that that brings up such a good point that even though a VC and an angel, let's say, are in the same round, that their level of access and their level of information and their ability to then reinvest in the pro rata round are very, very different. And I think that people don't consider that enough, because they go, well, these are my options. I'm going to do all of these options or one of them, right? But seeing the differences of how they really work, even in the same round for the same company, is wildly different. And the
Yeah,
way that, the founders may be treating you because of the level that you have came in at will be different too. And I think that that's not talked about enough. So it's
yeah,
really interesting that you have these different experiences to have that contrast for
yeah,
yourself.
yeah, yeah. It's true.
In terms of where the angel investments that you have done before, in are these the kinds of investments that you kind of go back to or re-entertain at later rounds with your fund, or is the fund focus very different from what your personal investment thesis is?
Yeah, they're definitely different. And so, while we have increased a couple of investments from the fund in the same round, we're not doing any follow on. Like, we're not holding back half the fund for follow
Mm,
on. $10
okay.
million fund, it's not big enough, right? Like, what are we going to do? Hold back 5 million and then only invest in half the number of companies? So it's not big enough. So we are just writing one check, or one amount per round. Um, Personally, though, yeah, definitely have some follow on. Oftentimes, it's I don't have to chase after it. It's just they're coming back again on a future round to our group. So, so I have done some follow on that way.
One interesting thing that you brought up was your venture partner. So you created a venture partner program with this person who is retired. Therefore, they have had a breadth of network and long, deep relationships. And I have also noticed on the flip side, there are a whole bunch of emerging fund managers who are hiring interns or people who are new to school, who are really just like building their own path and building their way to be the venture partners. And so you taking a completely different side, I can completely see why you would take this and why it would be successful, because it's very different having somebody on your team who already has these deep-rooted relationships that they've worked with, that they know how each other work, and they will get back to you, and you're not just kind of doing this cold outreach. And so I was wondering, in terms of how you have built this, is that something that you would do for your next funds, and in your future?
Yeah, for sure. We're gonna make the same deal, hopefully with the same venture partner.
Mhm.
And we're gonna go from a $10 million fund to a 20 or a $25 million fund. So we're gonna have larger checks, and we're gonna have to do some more family office type stuff. Potentially, maybe we could get second time fund managers. I don't know if we're gonna get any institutional or not, but at least start some conversations there. But yeah, like venture partners, take full advantage of that type of person assisting you with the fund, and
Yeah.
be very clear about what their role is. So we actually have 7 venture partners, which, sounds like a lot. It is a lot, but they have very specific roles and individual expertise. So we have the fundraising person. She's done for this fund, right? So
Yep.
we raised the whole fund in 10 months. So she
Wow,
did
that's
10
great.
months, and she's got her part of the carry.
Yeah.
And just for those who don't know, venture partners, they're compensated, but generally they're just compensated with a portion of the carry that you've agreed to
Mm-hmm.
give to them. So, but we have one that's a government lobbyist type expertise, and a
Right.
lot of CIBR and grant type expertise. We have a couple that have worked for much larger organizations, investment organizations, a teacher retirement fund and stuff. We have CPA, and he's a CFO and a CPA as one, social media expert. We have one guy who's just a grinder. I mean, he's the only one who came into the interview about being a VP that prepared a presentation about himself of why he should get to be the VC. But generally does real estate. But like a former Air Force guy, and like he just whatever if you need him to do if something, he's going to get it done one way or
Yeah.
another. Type of guy, you know. So yeah, a list of people like that really is, and we involve them in due diligence in areas where they might have some expertise.
Yeah. That's so interesting. And it's also so funny that he's the only one who came in with a PowerPoint presentation about
Yeah,
himself. I have heard this to be a trend these days.
yeah.
So that must mean that all of your venture partners are compensated differently in a different kind of structure. Is that right? Or is it all the same contract as well, and their tasks are just different?
Yeah, no, so they're the amount of so the we just followed actually the VC Lab template
Okay.
for venture partners, which is like you know, a top venture partner, executive venture partner is like a 5 to 7%
Mm,
portion of the carry, and then like you know, just a specific tasks venture partner might be 3 to 5%, and then very little work, occasional specific things, a lower end. So yeah, everybody is from 1.5 to 7% in the carry.
that makes sense. Okay,
Yeah,
great. That's fantastic. It sounds like you have a lot that it feels like you've done your fund for such a long time, and it feels like you have done investment for such a long time, and it's because you have a breadth of different kinds of experiences that kind of brought you to where you are. For someone who is new coming into this industry, what would be the number one advice that you would have?
I mean, I would for sure send them to the VC Lab. So you can't. It's not about learning though. Like I said, it's launching, so you won't last very long if you don't have the ability to sign up some LOIs with potential
Yeah.
LPs with like you know a non I mean a commitment that's non-binding type of thing for $100,000 each or whatever the case may be. Don't try to start a fund too big. You're not going to get any institutional investors as a first-time fund manager. So 5 to 10 million, maybe 15 million if you have a lot of rich friends that you can try to get into the fund. But you know, if you it's a fail if you try to start a $20 million fund and you only get 4 million in commitments. You know you all of your modeling and everything that you've done on how that fund is going to work is going to be a failure. So don't over commit.
Absolutely. And I think that that's fantastic advice for anyone who wants to start a fund and go through this path of investment. I want to thank you, John. I think that all the advice that you've given and all the things that we can learn from your journey has been absolutely incredible. So thank you so much for your time. You have been such an amazing guest on today's podcast. And I want to thank everyone else for joining us today on another episode of Unlocking Venture Capital.